Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Stellar Studio Sessions. My name is Richie Mashiko,
And I'm Jason Widmann, Director of Digital Strategy and UX here at Stellar.
and today we're going to be talking about some interesting UX stats. So
Yeah.
Jason, do you want to start us off with some interesting things that you found?
Yeah, we've got some interesting stats to talk about, and the stats are interesting because they bring up a lot of different topics. So we'll start here with infinite scrolling. Now, in the UX community, infinite scrolling is something that you generally find there's a lot of people who think it's great. There's a lot of people that seem to find it problematic. The main pushback for infinite scrolling is just that if for some reason I need to get to the footer, it's impossible. So the stat here is that Time.com's bounce rate dropped 15 percentage points after they adopted continuous scroll. So from a UX standpoint, that actually feels a little counterintuitive, but for them and their application, which is basically a laundry list of content that's available on their site, infinite scrolling actually worked really well.
Interesting.
So there are times where you have a sort of a UX principle or guideline that if you're smart, you know when to ignore it.
Right.
The next one is interesting as well. So in 10 years, a $10,000 investment in design-centric companies would have yielded returns 228% greater than the same investment in the S&P. So the interesting thing there is that a lot of companies, especially in the past, this is changing, but a lot of companies felt like spending money on design, so making things look good, making things work well, was really just kind of wasted money. If we have a good product and we have a good idea, that will essentially sell itself. Not true. You're actually going to perform much better when you put the time and effort into focusing on design-related aspects of your product or service. UX, the visual design, the branding. So all of that investment actually has a very high ROI, assuming that you take the time to do it.
Right. And I assume that's also the digital aspects and then physical products, right? I think one of the companies that I like is Simple Human.
Yeah.
Right down the street, and they design really nice like home goods, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Simple Human's a great company. They have a very defined design aesthetic, and of course, it's all about simplicity.
Right.
So, we live in this age where we have access to social media and we have the ability to crowdsource ideas, whether it's for a product or a service. So reaching out to your community, to the users that are actually engaging with your brand and your product, can yield a lot of really great results. An example of that is ESPN. The revenues actually jumped 35% after they listened to their community and incorporated suggestions for how to redesign the homepage to make it more effective. So the interesting thing is that as UX professionals, we spend a lot of time doing user research, but oftentimes, for whatever reason, sometimes it's a constraint that the client puts on the project, we don't get to engage directly with customers. We look at research that's been pulled or stats that have been collected, but this ESPN example really brings home how valuable it is to talk directly to the people that you're interfacing with. And that has a very high duh factor associated with it. Like, of course you should talk to people, but you would be surprised how many times clients don't actually want to do that. It generally comes down to either budget or a timing issue, a schedule issue, but not talking to your customers, not engaging them and getting input on how to optimize your product or your site actually can end up costing you more time and effort downstream because you have to go back and rework that later.
Right. I think we're kind of working on some DTC company ideas and CPGs, and one of the interesting things that I've seen is that companies are becoming really smart about how they engage their community.
Yeah.
Right. So instead of sending email surveys or things like that, they create Facebook groups and have their customers or users join that. Or another interesting channel I think is Slack.
Yeah.
More public Slack and even Discord, where you could really have the different channels to have different topics of conversation to really get that good user feedback.
Yeah, Avery Dennison was a client for several years, and do you know who they are? They make
No.
office supplies.
Okay.
They're mostly known for labels.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be surprised how many people are really super passionate about labels and office products and being organized at work. So much so that these are folks who volunteered to be a part of Avery's consumer group. So every quarter they have a meeting with a representative group of their customers, which also kind of function as brand advocates, and they go over all of the product suggestions that group has. So they're not primarily a digital company; they're primarily a paper-based company. But the fact that they've created a consumer group, a customer group that helps them determine their product development strategy is really smart.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Um, there's this tendency to think that design is, we just touched on this a minute ago, but that design is something that isn't really necessary, and that too much time and effort sometimes is spent on design issues. If you look at Bing.com, that's a search engine. Do you use them?
Like 10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, they're not really on my rotation list as far as search engines go. But it is an interesting stat that when Bing chose one specific color of blue over another shade of blue, they actually ended up boosting their revenue by nearly 80 million.
Jeez.
I don't know that you could tie it specifically to that shade of blue per se, but I think it's sufficient to say that taking a look at your design and tweaking that, making sure that the palette, the colors that you're using, the typography, the imagery and the style, the visual language that you employ, all of those things can work together to create something that feels better, that delivers a better customer experience from a visual standpoint, that represents your brand more effectively in a more compelling way. All of those things can generate revenue for you, can help you build a stronger, better business.
Right, and I could just speak from the point of a Gen Z millennial perspective that we really, when we go on websites, social media, we could really tell if a company's been really thoughtful about how they've designed their webpage, their Instagram posts, the copy, whatever it is, and I think, we see it all the time when we see a website that looks like it was designed in the 90s or the 2000s, right? And it just feels weird. And those websites that we go on that don't feel right, we just don't tend to convert on, right?
Yeah, it is interesting, and there's an actual design principle. It's called the aesthetic usability effect, and that states that as the perceived aesthetic value of an item or object goes up, so the more attractive I find it, the more useful I'm likely to believe that it is. So when it looks good, people think it works well. There's sort of this human psychology connection, and if you're a Mac user or you're a fan of Apple, they're a past master of that because they design beautiful products, the kind of products that you want to put in your hand, that you want to be seen with. They make you feel good when you touch them because they're high quality materials. Everything that Apple does really emphasizes that whole aesthetic usability effect.
100%.
Yeah, so spending that time and effort to make your brand look good, to make your site visually compelling, all of that is money well spent.
100%.
It's going to have a big impact on how people perceive your brand and whether or not they choose to do business with you. So another kind of interesting stat that we pulled out of the haystack is for every $1 spent on email marketing, the average return is $44.25. For the last few years, there's been this sort of chant in the digital space about how email is dead as a marketing tool. The interesting thing, though, is that companies spend more money on email marketing than any other marketing channel, digital marketing channel.
Right.
So it's definitely not dead. It doesn't always have an application for every brand. It really depends on the type of consumer that you're trying to reach or who your target audience is. Demographics play a part of that. So you'll find that certain generations or age groups are more or less responsive to email. All of that needs to be factored in. But email is definitely a marketing channel that every brand should at least consider and take a look at.
Right. And one of the things that I think of when email marketing is that if you look at it as another content platform like Instagram or Facebook or any of these social platforms where you could actually provide your email list with valuable content, then you're gonna get obviously much higher open rates, right?
Oh yeah, big time.
So I think a really cool example of a company that's basically built a company on email marketing is this company called the Skim, and what they do,
Skim.
the Skim, yeah, they're basically a daily newsletter for millennial women,
Hmm.
and they've grown absorbently high. They raised a lot of venture capital money. I think the last time I checked, they raised at least 7 million. So don't quote me on that, but and they have a really interesting referral program. They have these things called Skim ambassadors, where you get a unique link, and if 10 people sign up through that link that you share with your friends, then they'll give you like free swag. They'll invite you into their
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
community, and they've really used email really well. And and the demo is younger, so it proves that email still works for younger people if you
Yeah.
could provide that valuable content.
And that's really, you hit the nail on the head. The people's willingness to engage with content is largely a function of whether or not they perceive that content to be valuable.
Exactly.
Whether I have some sort of emotional attachment or interest in getting this information. The more important it is to me, the more likely I am to spend the time to find it, to deal with a less than ideal user experience. There's a lot of stuff that I do on Reddit and other online groups that are specific to some of the hobbies that I have, and those are generally not very usable sites.
Right.
It takes a lot of the fancy term in the UX world is user persistence, which just means that I can't get to my stuff very fast. But because I have a real emotional attachment to getting that information, I'm willing to spend the time and effort to do that. But for brands that don't have that sort of emotional attachment with their customers, that bad experience can kill your opportunity right on the homepage.
Exactly. Yep.
And in fact, it's a nice segue into the next stat, which is that 88% of consumers are less likely to return to a site after a bad experience. That's, again, it's another one of those stats that has a very high duh factor. But you would be surprised how bad some of the user experiences are that are out there today, especially with legitimate companies. So, great example, I live in a condo, and our homeowner association just switched our community laundry services over to a different company. And the washer and the dryers now are networked, and they have been for a while. But we switched over to a new provider, so I had to download a new app in order to interface with the washer and dryer.
Oh, yeah.
The sign-up process for that was horrible. It took like 20 minutes. If I could have thrown my phone against the wall
Right.
and not had to go buy a new phone, I would have done that. That's how bad the whole sign-up process was. If there was any way for me to never do business with that company ever again, that would be my choice. But
Right.
unfortunately, I'm stuck with it. So, but again, it's really one of those things that people think they can offer a brand or a product or a service and do well without creating that high-quality experience, whether it's the visual aspect of it, whether it's the interactivity.
Right.
All of that works against your brand because it makes it's essentially a loss of trust.
Right.
There's a loss of credibility. So it's kind of like, imagine if I went to a job interview and I showed up with a white T-shirt on that had food stains on it, and the pants look like I picked them up off the ground and haven't washed them in 2 years. That doesn't really create a very good first impression.
Exactly. And I think what you kind of hit on, creating that overall experience, I think we talked about Apple. I think it applies not just to digital, but to like physical retail too, right? Because I think, this story's been told so many times, but the difference between walking into an Apple store versus walking into like a PC store, a Microsoft store, or another computer store, it's just so much different, right? When you go into an Apple store, there's a bunch of people that are helping you. There's no walls of computers that are blocking your vision. Everything is flat. You could go in and use a product. They want you to engage with the product, and it's just the emotional feeling that you get when you go to an Apple store versus another store. It's just so much different, right?
Yeah, and the challenge with screen-based design is how do you replicate that in-store experience? So all the qualities that you just described, having help readily available, having the space be designed in a way that encourages you to interact with the products, to walk around and explore. The challenge is always, how do you replicate that on screen?
Right.
Because what you just described is exactly what we want to do.
Right. Yep.
So the next one has to do with speed. Slow loading websites cost retailers approximately $2 billion a year in lost sales. Again, this is another one of those functions of a bad experience. So if you have not optimized your pages for fast loading, you're probably living under a rock, because in today's world, having fast loading pages is definitely important because of the importance of mobile.
Yep.
Your potential for latency is much greater when you're out and about and you're using your phone, whether that's a spotty Wi-Fi connection sitting at a restaurant or a bar, or just being not in a good place for a cell signal. Mobile is definitely something that is very, very speed sensitive.
Yeah.
The same is also true of desktop sites, though. If, for instance, you're pulling a lot of information from different servers and you're creating a delay on the front end, a bit of latency, that can just really kill your experience. There's actually a lot of times, and maybe I'm not the right example here because I'm not the world's most patient person, but or I've just left a website because it's taking way too long for it to just do a simple thing like load a page.
100%. Yep.
So it's kind of like, dialing that back to what we were talking about a minute ago. Not only are the aesthetics important, but that experience is important as well. That includes how long it takes pages to load, how effective your interaction model is, how easy it is for me to find the product or the service that I'm looking for on your site. Getting all of those things right is critically important to delivering that high-quality user experience.
Yep.
The next one, and this one kind of rolls back again to the whole kind of your website is your brand. Judgments on website credibility are 75% based on aesthetics. So again, taking that job interview example, if I showed up at a job interview wearing boxer shorts and a greasy t-shirt,
Right.
not likely to get a job offer.
Right.
So putting your best foot forward, creating a high quality visual, high quality interactive customer experience is really important. Again, that feels like a duh factor, but if you just go out and look at websites online, especially some from brands that we're all familiar with, not every company has really taken that information to heart.
Yep. Yep.
The next one is another validation of that. First impressions are 94% design related.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we live in especially when it comes to the web and screen-based design, we live in a very superficial world. You have to look good.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think when we first meet someone, it's just like, what does that person look like, right? It's how what are they wearing? Are they groomed? Do they take care of themselves? Those things that it's superficial, but it's human nature.
Yeah.
Right.
And in fact, you just nailed it right there, which is we're not really talking about design issues. We're not really talking about technology issues. Really, what we're talking about is human nature.
Yeah.
People respond better when they see things that are visually appealing and aesthetically attractive. That's just a fact.
Exactly. Yep.
The last one here is also a little bit of a duh factor, but 85% of adults think that a company's mobile website should be as good or better than their desktop website. We've lived in this world, especially in the agency world, for about the last 10 years. Every website that we produce is responsive, mobile-friendly, streamlined. But again, you look at a lot of sites that are out there today, they're not very good mobile experiences. So despite the fact that we know that, for instance, half of all internet searches in 2018 came from a mobile device. So again, illustrating the heavy usage there, people still are not optimizing their experience for mobile. And a lot of times that means not just making the site load faster. It also means recognizing the fact that a mobile user doesn't necessarily have access to multiple windows. They can't always spend a lot of time reading. Images aren't necessarily going to be as big or as clear. So it's more than just giving a mobile experience. It's optimizing that mobile experience so that it's tailored specifically to people who are on a device and not sitting in front of a desktop computer.
Right. Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail there. Just thinking of my experiences on looking on a website on a desktop one or a laptop versus my iPhone. It's two completely different things,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So I think you hit the nail. You have to optimize for mobile, definitely. Yep.
There are some instances though where taking a mobile first strategy can be a little bit dangerous. So an example of that, um, for the last 5 years, Stellar has developed the front end, the design, the UX, and the front end technology for Hewlett Packard Enterprise's customer web portal. So that's an instance where mobile is not really a primary channel
Mm-hmm.
because you're basically, this is a customer web portal that allows customers to manage all of their software licenses for HP. And these are big pages that have massive amounts of tabular data. So think spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are not very amenable to a mobile device,
Right.
mostly because they end up lying outside of the screen, the visible area of the screen, and it's just very hard with vertical scrolling, horizontal scrolling. So that's an instance where taking a mobile first strategy probably wasn't really the right way to go.
Right. So it
So
just kind of depends on the context of.
yeah, I would say 9 times out of 10, your mobile first strategy is the right assumption, but there is that sort of 1% weirdo edge case where you might have a product or service that really doesn't benefit from that.
Right. That makes sense. Well, I think that was a really interesting conversation. A lot of interesting stats. And I hope you guys could use some of those stats and some of these insights that we found that you could apply to your brand and your company.
Yeah.
So, do you have anything more to add, or?
No, I think we're good to go.
Okay, we'll see you guys tomorrow on the next episode of the Stellar Studio Sessions.
Thanks, guys.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this episode of the Stellar Studio Sessions. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit that like button, and if you want to learn more about digital strategy, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.